Hey there, this is Sable. I wanted to talk a little bit about RBY Ubers because I was starting to record some videos on Uber's Premier League and kind of go over the games. And I realized a lot of people are not going to have any clue what is going on. A lot of people's impressions of RBY Ubers are very much set in like the old days where it was a two Mewtwo's clicking Ice Beam on each other. Even a lot of RBY players, I feel like, have misconceptions of how the tier plays right now. So I just wanted to kind of go through some sets, some different Pokemon in the tier, talk about like building a little bit. I'm not going to get super in depth because I am playing in that tournament and I would not like to give my opponents a how to guide on how to counter team stuff that I'm bringing and all of my opinions on the game and what have you. But I do think there's a lot to talk about with Ubers, and I think this will hopefully be a quick, useful guide for anyone maybe coming from later generations who's just like, I have no clue what is going on here. I don't understand why they clicked that. I don't understand why they switched there. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about Mewtwo first for obvious reasons. It's really centralizing. So as you can see here, I have this one labeled Old 2A Amne, so like Old 2 attacks Amnesia Mewtwo. It used to be that you would never see Mewtwo drop Amnesia, never see it drop Recover, and you'd see those two moves plus Psychic and Ice Beam, or Psychic and Thunderbolt, or sometimes Ice Beam Thunderbolt. You ran those coverage moves for different reasons. So if you don't have Ice Beam, then Executor would kind of sit on you. If you didn't have T-Bolt, then Slowbro could sit on you. And if you didn't have Psychic, then Chansey could sit on you. But overall, just as we've trended forward, people have like kind of realized Ice Beam sucks a lot of the time. You can't two-hit KO Executor, you can't two-hit KO Zapdos. Like you let up a lot of extra pressure just because you're not hitting ranges with this that Blizzard would reach. So this is kind of fallen out of favor. I wouldn't say that it's like a dead set. You still have people that run it right now in Uber's PL. When I get to reviewing some games, you'll see plenty of people running sets like this. But it used to be like pretty indisputably dominant, like near 100% usage, and now it's kind of in the gutter. It's much more typical if you see someone running Amnesia Recover now, it's going to be Blizzard and Psychic or Blizzard and T-Bolt. So as mentioned, the reason is Blizzard 2-hit KOs Zapdos, 2-hit KOs Executor. It does a way more damage to Mewtwo and Mew. Like crit Blizzard into Blizzard on Mew, and that thing might be dead. Just in general, it's way higher pressure and games have gotten a lot faster, so you no longer need that extra PP from Ice Beam. Even so, this set I would not say is like the most popular thing. It's just kind of what you do if you're planning on your Mewtwo being like the breaker, the sweeper of the team. Then you set up with a lot of like T-Wave support around it, explosion to remove some checks to it, and you go for it with this instead of trying to win a long drawn out game. So if you see Blizzard, this is one set it might be, but there's a lot of other ideas out here for like what it could be. A really common thing you actually see now is like Amnesia, Blizzard, Thunderwave, Self-Destruct Mewtwo. The idea is that this one kind of forces an opposing Mewtwo or Mew because Amnesia Blizzard is still really strong into anything that isn't like Cloyster. Even Starmie has a kind of hard time standing up to this. You get to spread some T-Wave, you just push some damage on a Mewtwo, and then you boom. And you probably won't KO it unless you crit. It does around like 60 to 70, depending on the rolls. But if you Blizzard them and then you self-destruct, they're on like 20% and paralyzed, so it's pretty easy to clean up their Mewtwo, and then you have a game state where maybe the opponent's team was more reliant on their Mewtwo being alive while yours isn't, because you have like a Slowbro and Articuno, a lot of stuff in back that can take advantage of that gap in their defenses. I'll get more into those Pokemon later, but basically the idea here is you're using Mewtwo to force a response and then just cause some damage, boom it. If you take out a Mew or a Mewtwo, that opens up a lot of other stuff that normally gets checked by those. You can also run Mewtwo Amnesialess. This definitely lacks a lot of breaking power. It's kind of setup fodder for an opposing Mewtwo if they're willing to take paralysis. But the idea is like you just have a super Starmie, basically, or a super Alakazam or whatever. You've got your coverage moves, you've got your insane stats, your incredible bulk, and you have T-Wave, which helps you sit on stuff like Tauros and just trade hits. You can soak up hits from things like Zapdos pretty much infinitely. Psychic types or whatever are just not a threat. This one, you can really run any attacking moves. Like you might see Blizzard Psychic. You might even see like Ice Beam Psychic. You might even see people like try stuff like Flash. It's like there's a lot of stuff you can do with this, but ultimately the point is that you're using it more as a supporting Pokemon with some longevity. And finally, Barrier 2. So, as the name suggests, Amnesia, Barrier, attacking move, Recover. Most of the time, your attacking move is going to be Ice Beam, but you can run like Thunderbolt or other moves. So, the idea with this set, if you remove whatever checks your one attacking move, so for Ice Beam, Cloyster, for Thunderbolt, like a ground type, you kind of just set up and sit on your opponent if they don't manage to force you out before you set up. There's no phasing moves in RBY, so really your routes through this are critical hits or bullying it before it sets up. This is the variant of Mewtwo that likes taking paralysis because once you get paralyzed, you can't get frozen. So you just sit there, you set up to infinity, and you force your way through. Um, Swords Dance Explosion Mew can chunk this pretty decently if it goes to +6, so it's not like foolproof. But really, the idea here is like, let's say your opponent has 2 attacks Amnesia Mewtwo. You sit on it and you stall it out and you eventually freeze it. If they have Mew, then when you're fully set up, the Mew probably can't kill you, and Ice Beam is eventually going to freeze it or outpace Recover. When you're at +4, Ice Beam does like about 50 to 60 to Mew, so unless you paralyze a million times, you're eventually going to break it or again freeze it. Barrier 2 teams usually have like a lot of support from explosion users, stuff like that to remove some threats. And then like if your opponent's team is a bunch of stuff that can't take an ice beam, after that, then you just clean through them. And there's some games in this UPL already where we see that happen, so I'll enjoy commentating those and kind of talking through the sets and the strategy there. But this one definitely is like a very potent sweeper if it gets the right support. And then let's talk about the other 100% usage mon in the tier, and then we can kind of talk about how you form teams around these two and why you use different Mewtwo's and Mews with different teams. Um, Actually, I do want to talk about one last thing with Mewtwo. So a set like this Blizzboom set, you might see this in lead, but you also in lead could see things like Psychic, Blizzard, Thunderwave, Self-Destruct. You could see like Psychic plus Fire Blast, and the idea with Fire Blast is you hit Executor and you hit Jinx for a 2-hit KO. So you kind of compress that into one slot and threaten to knock out every single sleeper in the tier if they just miss one sleep move or if you get a crit. So even like lead Mewtwo is a thing now, and that never would have been a thing before. So with that, like we kind of covered all the big Mewtwo types. There's a lot of them now. And Mew has just as many ideas behind it these days. So like classic Mew set would be something like Swords Dance, Earthquake, Explosion, Soft Boiled, physical setup mon that at +2 explosion is going to take out anything that doesn't resist it. Um, Kind of like a really bad support Pokemon. Sometimes people would do things like Swords Dance, Earthquake, Body Slam, Soft Boiled, so they could spread a little bit of paralysis. I think personally that that one's like a little, it's very lacking in attack power. Even at +2, you really, really don't kill anything. So it's kind of fallen out of favor for similar reasons to like Amnesia, Ice Beam, Psychic, Recover, Mewtwo, where it's just too slow. It doesn't achieve enough quickly enough in a tier where you have explosions flying around, where you have RBY's ridiculously broken sleep mechanics, where you have Mewtwo at +2 potentially killing a whole team. So people started putting Thunderwave on Mewtwo. Usually it would be this set because then you're not walled by Rhydon or Gengar, although you are walled by Flyers. So Swords Dance, Earthquake, Thunderwave, Soft Boiled. Sometimes people would drop Earthquake and run Body Slam or Hyper Beam, and then you trade what's walling you. Instead, you're walled by like Rock types and Gengar, but not by Flyers. So this is like a much more supportive Mew, but it still has the ability to like come in and set up on do nothing Pokemon or even on like paralyzed Mewtwo if it doesn't have Thunder Wave. And that's kind of what Mew's role was for a long time, is you'd come into Mewtwo when it was paralyzed, or you'd come in and paralyze it. And then you just sit there soft boiling until they paralyze, and then you'd swords dance. And you'd just do this and start threatening to kill it if it didn't respect you and get out. I think that's really fallen out of favor these days, and people are more in tune with just like using explosion users to force it out instead of trusting this really slow setup where you could get frozen or anything, number of things could go wrong. But for a while, this was just like the undisputed Mew set too. Over time, as with Mewtwo, people started thinking, hey, maybe I don't need recovery, maybe I don't need Swords Dance, maybe I don't need this or that. So people have messed around with the sets. This is sort of in the same vein as like the Amnesia Blizzard T-Wave Boom Mewtwo, where the idea is you get in, you spread some status, you explode something, you just break some holes for other Pokemon on your team to clean up. As with Mewtwo, it's pretty forcing. The difference is with Mew, a lot of the time, like Executor can switch into it, Snorlax can maybe switch into it depending on the set. So, like, you don't really force Mewtwo and Mew in the same way as Mewtwo does, because Mewtwo is just so absurdly dangerous. But this is still a set that can, like, get a good amount of damage off, blow something up, get a couple T waves off, and still it can force a Mewtwo out because, like, if you T wave it and then explode, it's not going to be very happy. It's not going to have many chances to recover. So people have been dropping recovery. They've also been dropping Swords Dance and going full supportive. So you might see some Mews where it's like Thunder Wave, Soft Boiled, and then like any number of attacks, Psychic, Blizzard, whatever. Usually these run Explosion just because you don't want to get caught with your pants down by a Mewtwo where it just sets up on you and then you can't do anything. At least if you T-Wave and boom, like something else can follow up. Psychic is a pretty typical attacking move just because Stab Psychic does a decent chunk to all the normal types. It's good into Cloister. Obviously, it's kind of walled by Psychics, but the thing is, if you bait in a Mewtwo or Mew because you're clicking Psychic and then you explode it, you're pretty happy, especially if you T-Waved it first. But this can run other moves, like I've seen people even run like Psychic plus Thunderbolt, Psychic plus Blizzard, and drop Explosion. Any number of things where the Mew is just more supportive. Especially I've noticed like Blizzard has a lot of uses because people will just hard switch Executor into Mew, assuming it has no moves to hit it. Because if you think of like this set here with Earthquake as the only attacking move, you're gonna like 10 hit KO Executor. So why would it be afraid to switch in and sleep you, right? But you can turn the tables by having Blizzard or stuff like that to just mess it up. And then last, Sweeper Mew. I like to say that I kind of invented this because I never really saw people run Hyper Beam on Mew until I started catching people off guard with it a couple years ago. But aside from the self-glazing, I just think it's really obvious why you'd run a set like this. If you support it with some T-Wave from other Pokemon on your team, if you support it with some explosion users to knock out things that could outspeed it, you can just set up Swords Dance. Hyper Beam plus Earthquake is perfect coverage in RBY. So at like +4, you OHKO most things. You just miss it on Mew and Mewtwo, but like you're close enough that even the slightest bit of chip or being able to Earthquake and then Hyper Beam them wins. This is like a little tricky to run these days because so many Mews and Mewtwo's have Thunder Wave, and as soon as you get Thunder Wave, the set becomes a lot easier to force out with any explosion user, of course. But if you get the chance to set up, this is basically an auto win once it's set up, especially if the opponent doesn't run T-Wave on their Mew or Mewtwo. So with those, like, as I talked through them, I kind of mentioned some team structures that might run things like this, but I think it's really hard to contextualize these sets without talking about the other Pokemon in the tier, because ultimately Mewtwo and Mew are 1/3 of your team. They're a really powerful 1/3, but as you can see by the sets, like they're not always the win cons. And I think treating them as always the win cons is just the wrong way to go about this tier. So Snorlax is a pretty typical support Pokemon. At one point, this was a 100% usage mon on every single team. It has definitely fallen off since then, but it's still very popular. I would say like it's probably hovering somewhere between 40 to 70% usage, depending on exactly who's in a tournament, but like mostly on the higher side of that. The classic Snorlax set is Fizzlax, Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Earthquake, or Counter. Some teams will run Counter to catch other Snorlax or Tauros or what have you, and then self-destruct. Snorlax has the strongest boom in the tier. It OHKOs a lot of things, even stuff it doesn't OHKO, like Mewtwo and Mew are going to be taking upwards of 80%, so it's very easy to pick them off. Body Slam is one of the most forcing moves in the game. Ultimately, like, it just does a lot of damage and then it dies. That's the idea with this, and it's still the Snorlax that is used most of the time on most teams. It's just generally a nice Pokemon to have because it's got pretty significant bulk, even with the lower special in RBY, where it doesn't have that huge special defense like GSC and onward. But even so, it just, like, Body Slam will take a solid 30 off of Mewtwo or Mew. It's hard to switch into. Like when you have Earthquake, there's basically no Pokemon that can switch in because it has perfect coverage. If you have Counter, it's scary to hit it. So it has a lot going for it. It's a pretty safe bet on most teams unless you just need more speed. And it's a great supporter for Mewtwo, Mew, or whatever other thing wants to clean up just because self-destruct is so ridiculously powerful. It's good at forcing out paralyzed Pokemon, so if it has T-Wave support, like, you can always, no matter what, force a Mewtwo or Mew out after you have them T-Waved if you have a Snorlax on your team, because self-destruct followed by any physical attack is going to remove them from the game. Barring Barrier 2 if it gets really set up, but even at +2, if you boom it, that's a decent chunk. There's also more recently people have been exploring different Snorlax sets, running Amnesia. So the idea with Amnesia is because it's just got such a huge damage output, it really forces things to come in and commit to hitting it. You can't scout it, you can't dance around it. So it can be really hard if it gets any free setup turns. It kind of forces in like Tauros or Mewtwo to deal with it. It doesn't always run these four moves. I've seen people do like Amnesia, Blizzard, T-Bolt, Self-Destruct to kind of just like say, no, you're not going Rhydon on me, you're not going Cloyster, you're not walling this, and then getting a boom on something they wanted to hit. But typically you like having Body Slam, so you have that paralysis threat when people go, oh crap, it's Amnesia, and switch out. Again, you just have this ridiculously powerful self-destruct, which means you can kind of do whatever you want. So there's some options. I think this is super underexplored, and I don't really have that much to say about it until we explore it a little more. But basically, this is one of the best physical attackers in the tier, which is a really nice thing to have when Amnesia exists and makes it so special attacks may not be effective in a lot of cases, but physical attacks always are. It's kind of the basis of RBY, OU, and Ubers. So I've got more physical attackers to talk about after that. Tauros is another really popular one, another pretty consensus top 5 Pokemon. Right here I have the overused set, where you run Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Blizzard, Earthquake, and just have perfect coverage. On teams that have problems with Cloyster, you might see Blizzard dropped for Thunderbolt. But this is actually the less common set for Tauros in Ubers. I would say you mostly only see this in lead, because ultimately, again, normal plus ground coverage hits everything. There's no Skarmory here, there's nothing like that. Aerodactyl is the only thing that resists normal and is immune to ground. I'll talk about Arrow later, but I'm just going to say from now it's not a good Pokemon. So you kind of don't have to run Blizzard, which opens up Tauros to do some interesting stuff with Leer or Stomp. Now, Leer is the more common and I'd say better set. So in RBY, how status moves work that change stats is if an opposing Pokemon is paralyzed and you use a stat changing move, whether that boosts your own stats or lowers their stats, it reapplies the speed drop from paralysis. This also works with the attack drop from burn. So the idea is if Tauros comes in on a paralyzed Mew or Mewtwo and leers them, not only now is Body Slam doing like upwards of 40% and Hyper Beam doing like 60, but now, even if they T-Wave you, you're faster than them, and even if they KO you, the next physical attacker just forces them out. So this lets Tauros stay ahead in the speed war versus Mewtwo or Mew, since a lot of times they run setup moves themselves that can reapply paralysis. And it makes Tauros just a massive threat to them if it gets in freely on them when they're paralyzed. Tauros obviously also is just dangerous because it's Tauros. It's 22% crit rate, it's pretty fast. hard to switch into because of stab normal moves. Sometimes you see Stomp over Leer. I think it's a little bit cheesy and a little risky. Um, More so in lead because Stomp lets you cheese past Jinx. If you stomp it and it flinches or misses Lovely Kiss, then Hyper Beam is a KO. So I've seen people use that to be a little cheesy. I would say Leer is just the better set if you're in back all the time, but in lead there's kind of a use case for Stomp. Tauros pretty commonly does get used in this tier as an anti-lead because there's a lot of sleep leads run here. Zapdos lead is pretty popular, and Tauros can at least like go 1-for-1 with it, even if it's not the most ideal thing. So you usually either see it like that or you see it in the back on more physically offensive structures. I'll talk through the last couple physical offense mons I have here and then kind of talk about what physical offense looks like. So Rhydon, similar idea to Tauros, Earthquake Body Slam. So you've got your perfect coverage, you've got your paralysis chance, and then you've got Leer to set up teammates or just break through on your own, and Substitute lets you use 101 HP subs to fish just for a paralysis. The 101 HP doesn't come up super often here just because like seismic toss Chansey or whatever is not super common. But there's a couple cases where you might get a substitute that actually can't be broken in one hit by the opponent. Notably, Rhydon Earthquake hits harder than Tauros or Snorlax Body Slam, of course, because it has more attack and Earthquake's a stronger move. It actually is capable of like 3-hit KOing Mewtwo and Mew, which is crazy and also means that when you leer them, they start going down in 2 hits or close to it. So like this is the best physical attacker in the tier, if not for the fact that it's slow and absolutely destroyed by so many special moves. So it, like, as with other ones, like you kind of rely on some paralysis support to help him out. Um, Golem is kind of just like the ugly cousin to ride on. It definitely has seen some success. The obvious difference is it has explosion, but you have 20 less attack and less HP, so like your bulk is just worse. And the 20 less attack actually does end up mattering a lot. You go from 3-hit KOing Mewtwo and Mew to like the tiniest roll to 3-hit KO Mewtwo and a 4-hit KO on Mew. Obviously, Explosion is just like the best move in RBY. At least arguably top 2 or 3 at worst, but a lot of people would say it's the best move in RBY. But even for that, I don't really think this guy's better. I think like Leer is just a very useful move, a move that stops opponents from getting out of control. I think Rhydon's damage ranges are just so punishing that you just like having that continued pressure over a one-time boom button. But it's there. It's a physical attacker. It doesn't hit that weak. Like ultimately, Golem Earthquake still hits harder than Snorlax Body Slam by a little bit, so it's worth noting. So a lot of times you'll see teams that run 2 or 3 of these guys with some supportive Mew that has like T-Wave, maybe even a supportive Mewtwo. And the idea is spread a lot of paralysis, put on a lot of pressure with physical hitters using Body Slam, and just break through the opponent by getting everything paralyzed and forcing them to switch into Body Slams. These teams often have like a very high pace. They're very pressuring and hard to hold off. They don't really give you any time to set up or recover. The big downside is all of these Pokemon you may notice not the most specially bulky, and they have some problems with certain Pokemon like Starmie or Articuno that can either sit on them or if you don't get body slam paralysis on them, may not ever break through them and can just threaten them back a lot and force them out. But generally, most teams want to have like at least one of these guys. If you're not using any of these for the physical offense, you're probably using Snorlax just to have a boom user. They really like support from stuff like Executor. They love T-Waivers. Um, and just anything that can deal with the problematic Pokemon for them, like Cloyster Articuno, are typically like physical offense checks. Barrier 2 is a huge problem for these if it gets set up, but it's a bit of an interesting matchup dynamic because Barrier 2 also has to somehow set up and not get fully not full paralyze a couple times, because if you do, you're just dead. So it's very frantic playing these teams or playing against these teams. And of course, these Pokemon can go on non-physical offense teams, as I mentioned, but like the archetype is kind of sticking these guys with some T-Wave Mew, T-Wave Mewtwo, other aggressive Pokemon to help support them, maybe an explosion user or two. So I'm going to get to sleepers next because I think these are just also important building blocks of any team. Executor is a consensus top 5 mon, probably the most popular sleeper in the tier. A lot of people run this as their only sleep user with Sleep Powder, Stun Spore, Psychic Explosion. The utility is very obvious on face value. You've got Sleep, you've got Paralysis, you've got Boom. Like, that's 3 of the best moves in RBY on one Pokemon. It also resists ground, it resists water, it resists electric, it resists psychic. Just basically, if this thing wasn't weak to ice, it would be as broken as Mew, if not more. Now, the sets on this thing haven't really been explored very thoroughly. In OU, you see a lot more stuff with it. I don't really think there's like a reason to run Mega Drain or what have you on it in this tier, but I do kind of wonder if there's more that you can do with Executor than this. But this set is just, it's good on any team. There is no team where you regret having an Executor, unless you already just have like a million Ice Weak Pokemon, then maybe you want to reconsider having yet another one. But good Pokemon, really only held back by the speed, making it not like the ideal sleeper. But as mentioned before when talking about Mew, it usually gets free entry on Mew. It often gets a pretty free entry on Rhydon or Golem. So it's got some opportunities. And then later in the game, if you get Boom, you're very happy. If you switch into a Swords Dance Earthquake Mew a couple times, you're pretty happy. Even though you don't do much damage back, just the threat of paralysis and Boom goes really far. You do see egg and lead sometimes. I wouldn't say very often, but some people really like it. Jinx, this is the OU set. I would not say this is necessarily what you use in Ubers, but I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. So Jinx, you run this as a lead sleeper, very obvious. It's fast, it's accurate. It's like the fastest sleeper with a 75% accurate move. But it's got some move options that I think are like still being explored. You always run Blizzard, you always run Lovely Kiss. This is just a given. But for example, it has Body Slam to threaten paralysis when they switch out after getting put to sleep on the first turn. It has Counter, which lets you one hit KO Tauros lead if they Body Slam you. You do need to lower your defense for it to be a guaranteed one hit KO. And yet again, I already have a game on my mind where I can showcase this when I talk through some of the Ubers PL games. But I wouldn't say you really run rest on this in Ubers. I just have it here because to compare to the OU set, you're not really getting rest off. But like you can run it and you can sit on Cloyster or Starmie or like Mono Blizzard Mewtwo with it. But I would say usually people are using Body Slam, Counter, even Seismic Toss, just because 100 damage on Mewtwo or Mew or whatever when they're paralyzed can go a long way. So it's got some tricks. Main drawbacks are just it's really frail and it's still not the fastest sleeper in the tier, which would be Gengar. So Gengar has to rely on Hypnosis. Pretty awful move, but in exchange for the fastest sleeper in the tier. Typically, you'll see it running Nightshade plus Thunderbolt. That's because Psychic plus Thunderbolt means you do very little damage to Mewtwo or Mew or Executor, which Mewtwo and Mew are 100% usage, and Executor is probably in the high 70s or low 80s usage-wise. So you don't really see Gengar's tech as much in this tier, although you can run Psychic if you expect lead Gengar on the opposing side and just smack it and see if you can win that way. It's a little more consistent because getting any damage on Gengar makes it a lot harder to use it later. Gengar infamously drops from like 70% to any Earthquake or Psychic or whatever in the tier. So sometimes just hitting it goes better. And the other benefit, of course, over Jinx is you've got Explosion. It's a weak explosion, but, chunking anything bulky for 45 to 55% is still pretty good. Still sets up teammates to just win anyway. And then Chansey has had like a pretty meteoric fall off in this tier. It used to be considered a mandatory Pokemon alongside Snorlax, Mewtwo, Mew. Now I think people kind of see it for what it is, which is a big momentum sink that does have the upside of being like the best special wall in the tier and very expendable as a sleeper. So it's got some roll compression. You have Sing plus Thunderwave. You can run Seismic Toss or Ice Beam. Ice Beam means that you do absolutely 0 to Mewtwo or Mew unless you just get lucky and freeze them. Seismic Toss at least has some consistent pressure. But really, you're running it for the dual status. You're running it for the fact that, like, Mewtwo is not just going to crit Oko this thing and cost you sleep. So it is a pretty consistent forcing Pokemon against Mewtwo. Downside, of course, is every physical attacker eats you alive once you take paralysis, but it is pretty consistent at getting sleep. Usually. It's definitely got some problems with just getting boomed on, but a lot of the time it'll get it. But then you kind of have a dead slot afterward, which is tough. So I would say Chansey has probably had the biggest fall off in usage. It went from near 100 to like 20, 30% at best. And even that's generous. Some people never use Chansey even once in a whole tournament. But it's still there. It's the slowest sleeper, but it's the most consistent one over time, even though Sing's accuracy is garbage. So that's our sleepers. Usually you'll run one or two of these on a team. If you're running a Jinx or Gengar lead, you probably have a backup sleeper. Most teams are going to have an Executor anyway. But there's basically no Ubers team where you just don't run a sleeper. Some people will do it, but usually it's just not a good idea. So next, I want to talk about flying types. You don't need to have these on your team in Ubers, but there's a very good reason to have them. As mentioned, a lot of Mews run Earthquake as their only attacking move, which means that you just sit on them forever with any flying type and force them out. So they all have different strengths and weaknesses, and just depends on what kind of matchups you're looking for. Zapdos, the weakness is very obvious. You're walled by Rhydon, you're walled by Golem, you're semi-walled by other ground types, which there's only really one that's in my consideration, but I'll get to that in a minute. It does good damage. You have the benefit of being a mixed attacker. So, like, if the opponent has a Chansey or what have you, it's not gonna wall you. If the Mewtwo gets Amnesia off, Drillpeck still does like a solid 20-ish something percent, so you're not like completely owned. I would not recommend generally fighting Mewtwo with Zapdos, but it's a pretty good T-Wave spreader that can take a hit and return T-Wave. Less so in this Blizzard Mewtwo era, but sometimes you just gotta go for it. Overall, it's like it's probably the highest rated flyer overall, and for good reason. Like, if you don't run into Rhydon, this thing gets really hard to stop. It can hold its own against pretty much anything in the tier that isn't Mewtwo. But there have been other flyers that have come up over time, and for good reason. Articuno is my favorite of the bunch. The benefit of Articuno is you completely destroy physical offense, because most of those teams run like Snorlax, Tauros, Support Mew, Rhydon, Executor. You can see how that would fold in half to 125 special stat Blizzard. It 2 it KOs Tauros, at 3 it KOs Lax. It does like 40% to Mew and like 35 to Mewtwo. One shots Rhydon, nearly one shots Executor. So if your opponent's team is one of those teams where the Mewtwo and Mew are either in a really supportive role where they're not using setup moves, or where they're using boom and clearing a path for the physical offense, then they start thinking, oh, I'm going to win now because my Tauros, Snorlax, whatever are going to break through, and you have an Articuno and it just comes in and completely obliterates them with Blizzard. So a pretty key component for Zapdos and Articuno is having agility. In RBY, if you use agility, it cancels the speed drop from paralysis, so these are very hard to stop once they get the train rolling. Articuno has some interesting text to it too. You can run like Reflect, because a pretty typical way to stop this is to like send in a Snorlax, send in whatever, click boom and chunk it for 80 or 90 after you get any other hit on it. But if you have Reflect, then you just take the hit and keep going, and the opponent is down a Snorlax or some other really valuable piece after that. So good Pokemon. It's nice to not be walled by Rhydon. You are walled by Cloyster, of course, but Cloyster just is not as used as Rhydon is. So it's a worthwhile trade-off to consider. I'm actually going to cover Moltres first and then come back to Dragonite. Well, Moltres is kind of a interesting middle ground between a few roles. So you do decent damage to Rhydon and Cloister with Fire Blast. There's not really a Moltres wall besides like Starmie. And you have Fire Spin. It's the crappy partial trapping move, but it is a partial trapping move. So if you get agility up, you can spin anything down with enough luck, especially if you've previously chipped it down a little bit, and then you have Hyper Beam or Fire Blast to finish. So Moltres kind of has like the highest and lowest threat level of the legendary birds. It whiffs a lot, but when it doesn't whiff, there's like not really an easy, obvious answer. Because, for example, if you have a Starmie and you switch it in as it clicks agility, and the Starmie is at like 80%, you genuinely might lose the Starmie if the Moltres gets a little bit of luck. Doubly so if it's paralyzed or something, like force it out at 65% one time, and next time it comes into a Moltres Fire Blast, it's going to get hyper beamed. So, dangerous bird, inconsistent bird. The other two are definitely like better in most cases, but there are use cases for Moltres. And again, the ground immunity goes a long way into certain Mew sets. Um, Notably versus like Tauros or Snorlax, you don't have the same bulk as Articuno, but you do have the same damage output, and Fire Blast is a 30% burn chance in RBY. So there is a chance you just completely neuter them for free while still attacking instead of having to click Reflect or whatever with Articuno to call out a boom. So that's a pretty big upside. And of course, like if you're already agilityed up and you burn something and then you start fire spinning it and you hit a couple times, it's going to take so much chip. So burn isn't the worst here as long as you can exploit it properly. Finally, Dragonite is like the last of what I'd call viable flyers in this tier. It's got T-Wave, which is always good. It's got Wrap to force paralyzed things to get out so you can T-Wave something new. Some really obvious weaknesses, though. 4 times weakness to Blizzard is awful. Mewtwo has an 82.1% chance to one-shot this with just Ice Beam. Um, like weaker non-stab Blizzards like Tauros just do like 90% to this thing instead of killing it. But even so, it's pretty tough to be a Pokemon that gets owned by paralysis and gets owned by ice moves. But in exchange, like T-Wave Wrap is really strong. A lot of teams run multiple slow Pokemon like Executor, so you can just wrap them outright. And overall, like it's a pretty deadly Pokemon, but you are relying on an 85% hit chance move to land over and over and chip things down. So these two are kind of part of like a wrap strategy, which is a viable idea in Ubers. I would say it's healthier here than in other tiers because you have more counterplay built in just between Mewtwo, Mew, and the fact that you're probably running some other fast Pokemon. But it can be really dangerous. And if you are able to support them properly, which typically involves running, for example, like these recoverless T-Wave Mews and Blizzboom Mewtwo's, the idea being, you spread some paralysis and then you explode and get out of the way for the wrappers to clean up. The biggest problem Wrap faces in this tier, besides inconsistency, I would say, is just the fact that everything combined has so much HP and recovery that you're not going to wrap it down, even with paralysis, unless you remove a few things. But if you manage to click Explosion 3 or 4 times and then go to a Dragonite, a Victory Bell, or whatever, you actually might just clean the whole team with that. So that's kind of the core of like a wrap strategy is lots of booms, lots of T-waves, and a couple of wrappers to finish up and push the last few mons down. So I've got 2 boxes of Pokemon to go through because there's a little bit more. So I'm going to talk about some more niche Pokemon while talking through this box. I actually want to talk about Victory Bell before Aerodactyl because we were just talking about Wrap. So Vic, pretty simple. It's shitty Executor, but it has Wrap and Razor Leaf. You kind of spread a lot of paralysis, then Victory Bell can either force Sleep Powder or keep wrapping through things. Again, like you're weak to ice, you're weak to psychic. It's tough out there for Victory Bell because after even mild chip, it's really easy to just come in and force it out with Mewtwo, with Tauros, with whatever. It's kind of like famous for choking. RBYers call it choke tree bell all the time because it just throws one games when it just needs to hit a couple wraps. But like you can pretty easily put together a strategy around Victory Bell plus Dragonite plus a bunch of things with T-Wave or Boom or both in this tier. And those are the teams I think where like Mew and Mewtwo without Recover and with Boom thrive a lot, just softening things up for Wrap. Um, Aerodactyl, I want to talk about that because we were also just talking about flyers. Don't use this. Allegedly, this stalls most Mew sets and most Snorlax sets, but one, you don't do any damage. I put Wing Attack on here to kind of highlight it because this is really a PP stall mon. You get PP stalled, your Aerodactyl gets PP stalled, but the thing is supposed to be stalling out if you don't run some crappy move like Wing Attack. If you run Double Edge, Fire Blast, Reflect, Rest, like you either sit there and do nothing and give Mewtwo setup, or you do nothing. Like there's just no real home for Aerodactyl here anymore, I don't think. It can win certain end games, but like if you're in that situation, so would using an explosion user, really, or any setup mon that can clean. It has niche uses, but as Mews are getting further away from pure physical and being the setup sweeper and whatever, Arrow just loses more and more ground. I would not trust it in 2025. But I wanted to talk about it because it actually is ranked on the VR in like B minus or something right now because we haven't updated it in a decent bit. But I'm going to make sure that we update the viability rankings after Uber's PL ends. Either way, don't use this. It's all the roll compression it offers is just built for a slower, older meta than the one we're in, and even in that meta, it was niche. Don't don't use Aerodactyl. Go play NU if you want to use it. Even UU, it's not here. So special attackers, support Pokemon, also important to talk about. Alakazam, much worse here than RBYOU, but Kinesis is a much better move here just because bullying Mewtwo and Mew with this and forcing them out can be pretty good. You still might just run Seismic Toss or Counter or stuff like that because those are just good moves on Alakazam. But it's just like it's a fast Pokemon, it's a decent lead, you spread Thunder Wave and click Psychic and drop things, and then eventually you die. Or maybe you hold on to it and later you come in and fight a Tauros with it or something like that. It can actually do pretty well later if the Mewtwo and Mew are gone on both sides. It can do pretty well cleaning up stuff like Rhydon, Tauros, etc. But usually you see this in a lead slot, just spreading T-Wave, using Kinesis to bully the thing out so you can try to catch a second T-Wave on the thing coming in, stuff like that. Starmie, in exchange for gaining a weakness to Thunderbolt, which is pretty brutal, you get way better moves than Alakazam. So there's a lot of stuff you can run on this in lead. Surf lets you hit Jinx and Mewtwo and Mew decently. Psychic scares out Gengar because you threaten to crit Oko it or just kill it if it misses on turn 2. Blizzard, good in the Executor. If you don't have Blizzard, you're walled by Executor. T-Bolt can be good for Starmie or Cloyster, but I would say it's a lot more niche here. Like Slowbro is really the only target for it and usually would use something else for that. As with Zam, usually a dedicated lead. You can run it in back because it's a pretty okay Tauros switch in, unless you get crit or paralyzed, which to be fair is going to happen half the time. But it's there, it's a backup check, it's got good speed and good utility to help support the team. I do wonder about running stuff like Hydro Pump or whatever on this, but honestly, you're really just using this to spread paralysis. It's not expected to do much more than that, but it is pretty good at doing that. Jolteon, in the same vein as Alakazam, you've got Thunderbolt and Sand Attack to just kind of bully in the lead. You can run Pin Missile to bully Executor if that comes in, but just similar to the other ones, you kind of run it in lead, use it to bully and force some T-Waves. Notably does speed time Mewtwo, which means if this thing is alive later in the game, you can use it to try to force a T-Wave or a Sand Attack or something to stop a Mewtwo if you're desperate. Not necessarily recommended. If you're in that spot, then you might be in big trouble anyway, but not a bad Pokemon. Better, I'd say better than overall than all of those, but obviously different role is Slowbro. Slowbro is pretty notable for a couple things. One, if an opposing Mewtwo doesn't have Thunderbolt, then Slowbro is usually going to wall it. I say usually because like crit psychics and psychic drops can bully through Slowbro, but it's it takes a lot of good luck in a row to push Slowbro out of the game. It's slow, but it's bulky. It's a pretty okay Tauros, Snorlax, whatever switch in, good Mew switch in. And it's kind of just by having Amnesia, you have like a secondary win con. That means you can kind of run this with more aggressive recoverless Mewtwo and Mew sets where your idea is to lure in and boom the opposing Mew and Mewtwo, and then you have a Slowbro and they don't. So you just set up Amnesia, you get your T waves on everything, and then you set up Amnesia and clear through. It's especially like that strategy works better now because there's less Chansey, less Starmie, etc. these days. But on the flip side, there's so much more aggressive and so much more aggression and boom spam that like even a setup Slowbro is probably going to get boomed at some point. But it still usually will trade positively if you give it the right support. This is another like win con Pokemon in the vein of Articuno, although it plays it very differently, spreading lots of T-Wave and then resting on things while they paralyze, whereas Articuno is just set up agility and go to town. But it's a solid supportive defensive mon, and it's also a solid like idea to play around as a win con. Both work pretty well. Cloister has been seeing a lot more usage recently and picking up. The upsides to Cloister are many. I would point out, first off, it's one of the better physical checks out there. T-Bolt Tauros obliterates it, but most Tauros don't run T-Bolt. So you have like a pseudo Tauros Snorlax switch in. It's still like, it's finicky because Body Slam Paralysis is dangerous, crits are dangerous. But those are upsides. It has Boom, which is never a downside. And like that Blizzard Boom Mewtwo, no matter how much an Amnesia's up, it's not breaking Cloister. So if you have a Cloister, you sit on that, you sit on Barrier Ice Beam Mewtwo. There is Barrier T-Bolt Mewtwo out there, but it's a lot rarer than Ice Beam because Ice Beam kind of just wins versus any team that doesn't have uh, Cloister, Lapras, Slowbro, Starmie, and even like if it's not Cloister, you're still in pretty big danger, I would say, to Barrier 2, even with a water type. So it's kind of the immediate defensive insurance Pokemon that has a lot of upsides besides that, just because Explosion is great. Clamp is another partial trapping move, so it's really dangerous if you have some paralysis spread on the enemy team, because they may not have a way to switch around Clamp. Notably, Clamp does ridiculous damage compared to other partial trapping moves. It's a stab move and over twice as powerful by default, so compared to like Wrap, you're doing 3 times the damage to anything that doesn't resist it, basically. Pretty good Pokemon. Definitely not as bulky as the defense and special suggest, just because of that HP, but it usually will get something in a game unless you get surprised by a T-Bolt user. I do think people are being a little loose with how they use the Cloister and throwing it into stuff, assuming it doesn't have T-Bolt and then just getting nuked off the planet. But when you take the time to check, it does a lot. I've got a couple more niche Pokemon to go over that fill some roles. Hypno is like an outside lead that you can run because Hypnosis plus Thunderwave dual status is strong. A lot of times you run counter on this in lead specifically to catch Tauros lead and return the hit to it. You can even run submission. Back when Chansey was more popular, you'd see like seismic toss submission or psychic submission, because submission does like 40% of Chansey. So one crit, one paralysis, and you're breaking that thing. These days, I'd say Hypno's definitely fallen off just because you see more Jinx in the lead these days, which destroys it. You don't see as much of this like Chansey coming in to click Sing after you get sleep type of stuff. So Hypno's not the same bully it used to be, but it still is like bulkier than Alakazam and has some tricks up its sleeve. So it's got some stuff. You could even run like Flash and just bully Mewtwo with it, with like Flash Rest or something. But I'm just not a big fan of running those really slow strategies where you're just hoping you don't get crit or otherwise uh, beaten. So, run counter if you're going to run this. Use it for the dedicated lead, para spreading, and sleep. Persian's a very niche physical attacker. Your upsides are slash, obviously always crits in RBY, so you get to go through barrier or whatever else, reflect if that ever comes up. Screech drops defense by 2, which is obviously better than dropping it by 1 with Leer. And then body slam, hyper beam. You can spread paralysis. You can do huge damage with hyper beam after Screech. The problem with Persian is it just doesn't have any bulk. You get nuked off the planet by everything if it just hits you. So you don't really get many opportunities here to actually like sit and Screech stuff and then finish it. But it's got some niche use cases. I think there is a consideration of using it versus like barrier Mewtwo because one full paralysis and you might actually get enough to like not lose the game to it. There's not really many moves that let you beat barrier 2 if you don't have something that defensively checks it or if you don't stop it from setting up in the first place. So I don't know, maybe worth a consideration. I'm not so sure how I like it in this metagame. Electrode, I've never seen anyone but Enagami use this. He's known for playing very outside the box teams, but the idea is it's the one Pokemon in the game that's faster than Mewtwo. It has Thunder Wave, it has Boom. I think it kind of sucks personally. Like Executor pretty much walls it and forces it to boom. Golem forces it to boom. Rhydon forces it to boom. And just besides that, you don't even do that much damage. Even if like Mewtwo switches in and you T-Wave it and boom on it, if you don't crit, that Mewtwo is shrugging it off. There's no problem with a 50 attack boom on it. So niche, I do think it's kind of nice to have that safety net of guaranteed faster than Mewtwo Pokemon, but it's not worth running Electrode for that. Just run Pokemon that can take the hit and retaliate. And finally, Sandslash, my baby. I love this Pokemon. I used to spam it all the time. I think this meta is not the most conducive to it, but it does have some traits going for it. You're faster than Rhydon, so you beat like other ground types. You still relatively wall Zapdos. Drill Peck does a decent amount, but you actually can sub on it. I think it does 22 to 26%, so most times you get the sub off. Swords Dance, obviously the big selling point. If you Swords Dance up, you do a ton of damage, do everything in the tier. Mew get 2-hit KO'd. So like, it's threatening, but you have problems with the fact that like Articuno and Dragonite are on the rise. That Blizzard Mewtwo just does more damage to it. That Cloyster is on the rise. There's just like not, the support isn't there. You need a lot of T-Wave support for it, but at that point, you'd kind of rather just have the upfront damage because setting up has become harder than ever in RBY Ubers. That's kind of the theme of recent RBY Ubers, is getting to click a setup move is harder than ever, but if you get it, you might win the game off it. But people aren't as bad at this tier as they used to be a couple years ago, where you would get chances to just Swords Dance or Amnesia to +6 and just go to town and win the game on people who tried to like sacrifice a sleeping Pokemon to you and you just set up on it. It's just a very different, much more optimized tier these days. I'd really credit people like Ghastly's for pushing a lot of that aggressive playstyle that has redefined things. But like taking these as a whole and ignore these, I like keep all the actual teams I use in tournament on Smog Tours, and these are just like random garbage from the past. But really, like building RBY Ubers now is very much like decide on how you want to win the game. Are you going to win by removing Mewtwo and Mew and then having more offense than them once those are gone? Are you going to win by having something like a Slowbro or an Articuno, removing the checks and then letting it clean up 4 things by itself? Are you going to do the classic and actually set up for Barrier Mewtwo or 2 attacks Amnesia Mewtwo to win, or Hyper Beam Mew? And then you kind of set your team up around it. So I'm actually going to like pull out one of these old crappy teams. Like they're really not good. But for example, if I pull this out, this is at least like 6 months to a year old. But you can kind of see the idea here, right? Like there's a Thunderbolt Tauros, a lead Mewtwo that bullies out sleepers and tries to T-Wave boom the opposing Mewtwo. The Mew is like very supporty, just get T-Wave, just pressure stuff and continually force out non-T-Wave Mewtwo. All of it kind of building to an Articuno sweep. I wouldn't say it does it in the best way. I'm not sure that I love having a Starmie on this team. I'm not sure I love the Mew set for this team when you probably want an explosion on this. But ultimately the idea is remove the enemy Mew, remove the enemy Mewtwo, or remove Cloyster if it's there. And then Articuno wins. Or let's see, if I go back older, I probably have some more classic teams that I can actually kind of use as an example. Yeah, some of these are very old or stuff I have in Builder from samples. Let's just build one while I'm here. So for example, let's say I wanted to win just using a barrier Mewtwo. So let's go with Ice Beam because that's like the more common set for barrier 2. So we're always going to have a Mew, we know that much. And if we were using a barrier 2, a pretty easy way to use Mew successfully on that is give it like Swords Dance, give it T-Wave, give it Explosion, and then you give it any other physical attack, but I'll go with Earthquake for this. So no healing, you set it up, you boom it, you remove some problem for the Mewtwo that it doesn't have to deal with anymore. Beyond this, like you really just need to deal with enemy pressure and you need to deal with like Cloyster. So I'm going to just use this again because it's a pretty easy classic way to stop Cloyster. But let's go with a T-Bolt Tauros. Tauros is, I would say, one of the stronger lures for Cloyster in the tier just because not much switches into Tauros in general. So that's like one way to play around it. We're going to put an Executor on this because Executor is just a good Pokemon every single time. There's never really a case where you don't want it. Another Boom user helps remove stuff that Mewtwo doesn't want to deal with. So like now that we've got these 4, what are we worried about? We don't love switching into stuff like Snorlax at the moment. We don't love dealing with boom pressure before Mewtwo gets set up. We don't love, like, we don't hate Articuno, but we don't really love playing against Articuno as things currently stand. Rhydon is not the easiest thing for this to deal with. Again, like it's a switch-in problem. So you might even like bulk this out a little bit with a Cloyster, where to even put Hyper Beam on it, just to like break Chansey if they have one. You're probably not clicking Rest with this thing in this tier. And we need a lead still, because we're obviously not going to lead Barrier Mewtwo. And I think you could probably lead like Gengar on this. I'm building this super quick because I don't want to just sit here trying to like work through the process when this is just meant to be like a basic explanation of the tier. But the idea here is like we've kind of picked out a win con and decided how we're going to get there. We're going to get sleep. We're going to spread some paralysis. We're going to click lots of explosions, and we're going to leave it as like Mewtwo versus a couple things left. It'll set up to +4 with Amnesia, +6 with Barrier. And let's say the last 2 Pokemon on the opposing team are, say, Mewtwo and Mew. You're inevitably going to freeze one of them, and the other one can try to stall you, but you don't have to hit it because you have 48 Barrier, 32 Amnesia, 16 Ice Beam, 32 Recover. Once you freeze one, they kind of have to keep going to the frozen Pokemon and hoping you don't Ice Beam that turn. Otherwise, you are just going to kill it and then stall them out. That's one way to win. If you can remove one of Mewtwo or Mew, and let's say the rest of their team is not recovery using Pokemon, right? Let's say they've got like a Mewtwo, a Tauros, and a Snorlax left. You set up in the Mewtwo versus Mewtwo matchup after you like intentionally switch this into Thunder Wave. You set up fully on it, and it's like a 2 attacks Amnesia Mewtwo. You inevitably are going to freeze it, and then Snorlax and Tauros can't kill your Mewtwo without multiple crits and full paralysis in a row. So you're just kind of trying to use these other ones to take out anything that has recovery or anything that hard walls it, like Cloyster walls out Ice Beam Mewtwo, obviously, no matter how hard you boost. So You just have to kind of pick a win con and decide how you're getting there. Sometimes you might even pick like two of them and have a couple of ways of winning. It just kind of depends on the team. I don't know that I love this team as it is. I probably would spot more issues with it if I sat here longer, but I'm just kind of trying to demonstrate how to think of what the opponent might have in back and what their win cons might be. It's not easy to pick out what someone's win cons are just from seeing like explosion user, T-wave user, because those are just good things you should have on a team in RBY Ubers regardless. But I would say like the volume of explosions and T waves does tell you what they're trying to do. A big emphasis on T wave might suggest that there's a focus on physical offense. A big focus on boom users might suggest that it's like a very much last mon raid boss win con like Barrier 2 or Articuno or Slowbro. Um, if you see like T-Wave Boom on both Mewtwo and Mew, that might suggest Wrap because you're just trying to clear space for Wrap to kill things, and it really needs that much chip damage as possible spread so that people can't just tank Wrap by switching back and forth. Either way, like there's a lot of creativity in this tier. There's a lot of options for how you build, but I hope that just talking through some of the sets and Pokemon maybe helps just like serve as an intro for people who are actually interested in watching competitive games in this tier or playing it themselves, but maybe don't quite understand why people are making the moves they're making or what to expect next when they see four Pokemon revealed, how to guess what might be coming as Pokemon number 5 and 6 on a team. So I know this is like an hour long, and maybe people aren't going to want to listen to that much yapping about RBY Ubers. But I don't know. I hope it'll help someone if you watch the commentary I'm going to do on UPL games after this, both my games and other players' games. Maybe this will help kind of identify what's going on before I just say it and give it away. So, either way, this is probably going to be the first video on RBY Ubers that I put up on my channel. I did record some commentary on Ubers games already, but I really want to go back and re-review and think about how to make it like useful commentary and not just play by play. So I'm open to any feedback anyone has. If you watch through this whole thing for an hour, then thank you. I can't imagine someone listening to me for a whole hour yapping about RBY. So super appreciate you if you did. Feel free to leave me a comment with anything you think I missed or should cover, or any future stuff you'd like to see RBY related. I play every RBY tier, so I can really talk about any of them like this. But for now, I'm just going to focus on covering all the Ubers Premier League games. I won't cover mine in quite the depth I'd like to because I don't want to just give my opponents all of my techs, all of my whatever while I'm in the middle of a team tournament. But afterward, I'm going to come back and talk about my teams a little bit more. I have them all saved, so it'll be fun to talk about my process for building each week. But yeah, let me know what you think. Keep an eye out for RBY Ubers videos after this, and see you in the next one.